Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. After over 1,000 interviews on here with tech leaders talking about how they're using technology to transform the world in a good way and actually make a difference. You know what I love more than anything? It's the fact that I'm amazed every week by some of the stories shared on here and how they help me and hopefully you listening to think bigger, question reality and push the boundaries while exploring the art of the possible. And of course, always being curious. I think that's the key to everything in this life. So today I'm going to speak with the CEO of a company that is perfecting the technology to make a viable organ replacement a safe, accessible and affordable reality. Heart disease is the number one cause of death in virtually all developed countries throughout the world. But one company is looking to change the way we treat heart disease, and they're called BIOLIFE4D. And they're based out of Chicago, and they are a pioneering bioprinting company who just announced the ability to 3D bioprint a mini human heart. And the company's ultimate goal is to bioprint a fully functioning heart that is viable for transplant. And this is a major milestone. It's inspirational stuff, but enough from me. Let's go all the way to Chicago so we can speak with Stephen Morris, CEO of BIOLIFE4D. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Stephen. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Stephen Morris. I'm the CEO of BIOLIFE4D, and BIOLIFE4D is a biotech company located in the United States, and we are working on providing or bioengineering human hearts viable for transplantation, bioengineered out of the patient's own cells. So we not only address the lack of supply, but we're also addressing the major challenge with donor transplants, which is the challenges associated with rejection.
It's incredibly exciting work that you're doing there. And for my research, BIOLIFE4D is a company that, like you say, is perfecting the technology to make viable organ replacement a safe, accessible and affordable reality. But before we find out more, I've got to ask, can you tell me a little bit about the problems that you're setting out to solve, just to get everybody on the same page?
Absolutely. So by far, the leading cause of death around the world globally is cardiovascular disease. It takes 1 out of every 3 lives in every developed country around the globe, in the UK, in the United States, every developed country. So it's just an incredible problem. If you think about that, there's about 7.5 billion people alive, and about a third of them are going to pass away of cardiovascular disease. And towards that end, there's only 5,000 heart transplants that take place globally each year. About 3,500 in the United States and about 1,500 throughout the rest of the world combined. So there's so many people whose lives could be saved if they had access to a bioengineered organ for heart for transplant that are currently dying because there's just no supply for it. There's not sophisticated programs throughout the world because of the incredible lack of supply.
So what's the story behind BIOLIFE4D then, and how the company was formed? Because I've got a feeling there's got to be a story here as well behind the technology.
There is. Actually, the company was really formed by accident. My last company was a medical device company. We made surgical instruments and implants for the medical industry and had a nice run with that, sold the company, stayed on as president for a few years, and then retired from that and wanted to look into what I was going to do next. I was still under a non-compete with that company. With the people that purchased the old company. So what I did was I went back to my old customers in the medical industry and talked to them about doing rapid prototyping for them. So it's very important for them to get to their products out to the market as quickly as possible. And I knew they were spending several months in the prototyping phase of the process. And I went to them instead of taking a few months, What if I can provide you your prototypes in a few days by 3D printing them? And they were all very excited and said they would fill up all my capacity. So that was my plan, to do a 3D rapid prototyping house. And I knew I had to become an expert in 3D printing. I knew a lot about it, but I needed to become an expert in it. And as I was doing more and more research, just by accident, I kept coming across research and articles about 3D bioprinting for the medical industry, and they were very intriguing. Although, to be perfectly honest, at least at the beginning, I would read them and say, wow, this is really cool, but it sounds like science fiction. And but then the more and more I read and the more research that I did into it, I realized that we're actually at that point in human history where all of the necessary things that have to be in place are in place in order to make this a reality. So the computing technology, the software technology, the bioprinting technology, the life sciences itself, all of those have evolved to a point that can make bioprinting and a bioengineered organ for transplant a reality. So what I did was I went out and I broke that process down into all of its different steps. I went out and found in the United States who was leading research in each of those individual steps, got them together and said, let's work together as a team in order to take this technology, get it out to the market so we can save millions of people's lives. That was how BIOLIFE4D came about.
Fantastic. And as a pioneering bioprinting company, you recently hit the headlines. I've seen a lot of the stories online as well about announcing the ability to 3D bioprint a mini human heart, which is incredibly exciting. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. We're tremendously excited with that milestone. So there were really two reasons that we chose the heart as the organ that we wanted to do. One was because of the incredible global need, how it could help all of humanity. So that was a driving factor. But also we knew if we were to do a liver or a kidney or another organ like that, until we had the whole organ, we really didn't have anything. The heart is different, though. The heart is made up of valves and ventricles and different things that currently, for lesser advanced heart disease, there's requirements for out in the market. So there's a lot of people that require heart valves in order to be replaced. And so that's something that we knew that we could do on the way to our full human heart. One of the milestones we did, our first major one, was our cardiac patch. That was taking cells going all the way through our incredible process and ending up with living human heart tissue that ultimately can be applied to a patient's heart who's had a heart attack in order to help the function of the heart, help increase the function. So that was the first major milestone that we hit. And just recently, as you mentioned, our next major milestone was our mini heart. So really what that is a shrunk down version of a human heart, about this little bit bigger than the size of a large cherry. And it has all of the different components of the heart, the valves and the ventricles and everything else. It's just a shrunk down version. So we were able to do our proof of concept. We were able to print that heart. Currently, what we're working on now is tweaking the function of that so that the mini heart can be used for cardiotoxicity testing. So it's really interesting. Currently, any new drugs by pharma or drug discovery companies, before they go out to the market, they have to go through a regulatory pathway. Usually that involves some sort of animal testing and then human trials before it ultimately can be released to the general public. Well, the last thing that the FDA, in our case, requires us to do before we bring these drugs to the human population is testing on animals to see whether or not it has toxic effects on the heart. The reason is because that's the main reason why drugs fail once they go to the human trials, because they have these negative effects on the human heart. The problem is that the animal model, they're a different species. So although it's the best predictor we currently have before we go to human trials, it's not a terribly reliable one. So too often it gives misleading results. So as a result, drug discovery companies, pharmaceutical companies end up spending hundreds hundreds of millions, it could be $1 billion on these human trials, huge amounts of money, most of which fail. So they're very desperate to look for something that provides a better predictive model. So our mini heart is designed so that we can provide it to the pharmaceutical companies and drug discovery companies to use as a test before they go into those human trials. It'll be a more reliable test than the current animal model. And as a side benefit, as we're able to get this approved with the FDA, we may be able to start reducing for the first time the amount of animals being used in testing circumstances like this. So it's a really big win-win situation.
And for people listening that are outside the medical community, can you just tell me a little bit more about the actual benefits of printing a mini heart?
Sure. So currently, for instance, our chief medical officer is a heart transplant surgeon. And as I mentioned, there's only 3,500 people that get heart transplants in the United States each year. There's 3,500 people on the heart transplant waiting list, but there's close to 200,000 just in the United States that need an actual heart, life-saving heart transplant, but they're not even allowed on the list because we ration those hearts because there's so few of them. So there's two main objectives that our technology addresses. One, for those other 200,000 people and for all the people around the globe who don't have access to a life-saving heart transplant from a donor, it provides an option for them. The other main item that the technology addresses is the lack of rejection. So what happens is when you take a donor organ and you transplant it into your body senses that that's not part of your body and wants to reject that organ. And in order to prevent that, you have to take, in the case of a heart transplant, a significant amount of immunosuppressant therapy. So you have to take drugs in order to shut down your immune system so your body doesn't reject that organ. And as a result, you're susceptible to all sorts of diseases and things. So our heart transplant surgeon tells his patients, while this donor organ will save your life, you're really only trading one disease for another. It's not a great quality of life because you have to shut down your immune system, and even if you catch the flu, you could die from that. And so it's not a really, really good solution. And on average, heart transplants only last about 10 years. So it does save your life for a limited amount of time, but doesn't necessarily provide you a good quality of life. Our technology, because we bioengineer this replacement organ out of the patient's own cells, eliminates the rejection challenge so the patient doesn't have to take immunosuppressant therapy. So they will not have that to worry about the diseases and all the other types of things that come associated with shutting down your immune system. So it truly could represent a cure for these people.
So can you talk me through the actual process and how it works and what's involved, just so people can understand exactly what you're doing here?
Absolutely. This is really cool science. So what we do is a patient who needs a heart transplant would go to their doctor, and the doctor would take an MRI scan of their heart as well as a sample of their blood. The MRI scan is just used so that we can, when we do bioprint the organ, we can make it a perfect size, so it's a perfect fit to go back into that patient. Then what we do is we take that patient's blood and we separate out the white blood cells from the patient's blood, and then we literally reprogram those cells to become stem cells again. We induce them to become stem cells, so they're called induced pluripotent stem cells. So every cell started out as a stem cell, and then when the body needs it to become a specialized cell, the body communicates to that stem cell, and the stem cell has the ability to change itself into any type of cell that the body needs. And so it changes itself into whatever type of cell that the body is asking for. So what we're doing is we're communicating to these cells and saying thank you for becoming a white blood cell, but now we want you to go back and become a stem cell again. And once we reprogram those white blood cells to become stem cells, they start dividing again. So as they're doing that, we're creating a larger volume of cells because we need a lot more cells to bioprint an organ than we can get from the blood supply. So those cells start dividing and keep going until we have the correct volume of cells that we need. And then what we do is we separate those cells into different piles, and we then reprogram some of those cells to become each of the different cell types that make up the heart, the building blocks of the heart. So there's the cardiomyocytes, which are the cells that actually beat, and there's cells that are that conduct the electrical signal, and there's muscle cells. There's the different cells that make up the heart. And once we have enough of each of those cell types, we take them and we put them in what we call our bio ink. So it's the bio ink, it's the ink that we use when we ultimately print. And think of those like little balls of hydrogel, like little bubbles of water, and floating in that bubble are cells and growth factors and nutrients and things, that special sauce that we put in there to protect it and help the process along. And then what we do is we load all of this into a bioprinter. And a bioprinter is actually very similar to a normal 3D printer, but it's specially designed so that it protects the cells during the printing process. Normal 3D printing, you melt one layer to the other. You can't do that when you're bioprinting because you'll kill all the cells. So what we do is layer by layer, we construct that heart, a full-size human heart, the exact size for that particular patient, layer by layer, and we lay down all of the cells. Well, the cells are still not joined together, so what we do is we also lay down what we call scaffolding. So just as if you were building a house, you put supports on the walls and things like that until you have enough of the house built. That's scaffolding. We do the same thing. We lay material around this to hold everything in place at the very beginning of this process. So once we're done laying everything down layer by layer and bioprinting this organ, everything is held in place. We put it into what's called a bioreactor. And a bioreactor is really like a big jar where you submerge this organ into a substance that simulates blood. It's not blood, but it serves the same function as blood. It provides oxygen and nutrients and things like that to the organ, and allows all of the cells to release their waste products and things like that, so it keeps the organ viable. And it takes about 3 days. During those 3 days, the natural biologic process, all of these cells join together, form networks, the cells start beating and everything like that. It sounds incredible, but that's the natural biologic process. It's the same process that formed all of your organs on every human being's body. It's the same process. Once it does that, and it's a solid organ, we can then melt away the scaffolding and be left with the solid organ. So really what we're doing at the end of the day is just recreating the natural biologic process that has formed every human being anyway, but we're doing it in vitro, outside of the body, and we're tricking the cells to believe they're inside the body, and so they do what we want them to do instead of what the body wants them to do. So it's an incredible process. Once that's done, the transplant surgeon could take that organ, implant it or transplant it into their patient. It'll be a perfect fit. It'll also be a perfect genetic match because it's actually made out of the patient's own cells, so the patient won't reject it.
Now, I appreciate we are in the very early days here, and this is a pretty big question, but how far away do you think we are from actually bioprinting a fully functioning heart that is viable for a transplant?
Well, there's two answers to that. The first is doing it on the smaller scale, like of our mini heart, and we think that we're going to have our mini heart functional for cardiovascular testing and things like that next year. So we're super excited about that. But from there, it's a matter of scaling. But that's a bit of an understatement. To scale from something that small to something the size and volume of the human heart is going to certainly provide a lot of challenges. One of the main ones is the vascularization. So there's a little bit of, in order for the organ to remain viable and stay alive, it has to receive oxygen and nutrients that the blood supplies our native organs. And printing that vascularization, the channels in which the veins, arteries, things like that, where the blood flows, is a lot easier on a smaller scale. As we move up to a human heart-sized heart, that vascularization we think is going to be a bit more challenging. The other thing is instead of working with millions of cells, when we scale up to the size of a human heart, we'll be working with billions of cells. So everything is more complicated. I would say that if we're able to proceed at the pace that we've been proceeding so far, we could be looking at 3 years to maximum of 5 years, I would say, before we could have something that could go into a human.
Wow, that's phenomenal. But what are the biggest challenges in perfecting that technology to make a viable organ replacement a safe, accessible, and an actual affordable reality, do you think?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the main challenges are in probably the vascularization. The other challenge that we're having is that we're able to print all of the separate components of the heart, but it's when you're putting them down layer by layer in a 3D bioprinting and a 3D printing process, it's significantly more complicated. So the program and the bioprinter capabilities, there's a lot of things that feed into that are challenges currently, and those type of things actually may get a little bit easier as we scale up, because it's so difficult to get the scaling of a small-sized heart right now when we're printing. So that's something that is a challenge that we'll face. As far as it being an affordable reality, currently, when people have a heart transplants, it costs about the insurance companies spend about $1.5 million for that patient. About $500,000 of that is associated with the upfront, the donor heart and the surgery and all of the hospitalization at the beginning. And then $1 million is spent on that patient's care over the next 10 years. So the insurance companies are currently spending about $1.5 million per patient. With a bioengineered heart, we're able to save a lot of the money of the hospital right after the surgery, because most of that time is spent on helping the patient prevent rejection. And most of that will be eliminated. So we think the upfront cost can go somewhere from $500,000 closer to $300,000, and then most of the $1 million that's spent with that patient afterwards will be able to be eliminated as well. So it's one of those rare things where it's really a win-win-win situation. It's a win for the hospitals and the surgeon. It's definitely a win for the patients, and it's a win for the insurance companies.
And we are about to enter a new decade, and I imagine there's going to be lots of exciting opportunities. So long term, how do you think bioprinting could actually revolutionize healthcare?
Well, this certainly is a one way to revolutionize healthcare. Bioengineered organs would certainly have a profound impact on humanity. In addition to that, there's lots of other things that can happen. For instance, personalized medicine. So in the event that you had a liver problem, now what happens now is that you would go to the doctor, and the doctor would say, okay, you have this liver issue. Let's try this medicine first that we think will work. And then if that doesn't work, then they try something else, and then they try something else if that doesn't work. Well, if they could actually take some of your cells and print some of your own liver tissue out of those cells, bioengineer some liver tissue, and then take that liver tissue and test these different therapies to see which one works best, they can then start out with that therapy first. So there's all sorts of applications for personalized medicine. With stem cells, they're already doing things such as bone marrow transplants, where someone has cancer in their bone, they remove the marrow inside the bone and evacuate all of the cancerous cells, and then inject back into that cavity person's stem cells. Those stem cells will change themselves back into the marrow cells, and ultimately that person should have a healthy bone free of cancer. So there's all sorts of applications, and as we move forward, they'll just continue to be more and more.
Now, it has been 52 years since the first heart transplant, and of course, incredible strides have taken place since that first procedure, but there is so much more to be done. So that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to get you on the show today. But looking forward, what's your big focus? What's that going to be in 2020 to continue to drive this innovation forward?
Well, certainly we're full steam ahead. We're focused on our mini heart first, because we know that can get out to the market. There's no regulatory path that's required with our mini heart, because it's never going to be implanted into a human. So it's our ability to get to the market and really have a substantial impact in the short term. And then as we move forward with the valves and grafts and patches and other components that are going to treat lesser advanced stage heart diseases, we're super excited about that. And ultimately the heart, I can't overstate how much of an impact that can have on a global basis. Almost everybody who could be saved by a life-saving organ transplant currently is dying because they don't have access to it. And with 1 out of 3 people globally dying of cardiovascular disease, the numbers are just staggering. So this just has the opportunity to just have a profound impact on humanity.
Well, a huge thank you for coming on today. Before I do let you go, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people listening want to delve a little bit deeper and find out more information. So can you remind them where they can find you online and contact your team if they are left with any other questions?
Absolutely. Everyone is free to visit us at biolife4d.com. That's www.biolife4d.com. And you can see who we are, what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it. You can see some really cool videos as far as the process of exactly how we're doing what we're doing, how we're bioengineering this organ out of a patient's cells. And you can find out everything that you'd want about BIOLIFE4D there.
Well, every day on this Daily Tech podcast, I try and explore a different industry of how technology is improving the world and transforming multiple industries. And I also say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. But what you're doing here is saving lives, and hearing about how you're printing a mini heart and talking about how bioprinting can revolutionize healthcare is truly inspirational. I just think it makes everybody think bigger and what we can achieve by working alongside technology. It's amazing. It really is. So thanks for coming on today, Steve.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Simply wow. Bioprinting a fully functioning heart that is viable for transplant. The fact that we're even thinking and talking about this is amazing in itself, but being close to making it a reality, truly inspiring. And I cannot thank Steve enough for coming on here and taking the time to speak with me about the company's recent milestone, the benefits to printing a mini heart, and how bioprinting can revolutionise healthcare, and all the other things that he talked about today. As you can probably tell, he blew me away. But I'm curious, do we have anyone else listening from the world of healthcare out there who might be listening and have something else to share about how bioprinting can revolutionise healthcare? If you do, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, and let me know your insights and anything else you can add to today's conversation. But that's it from me today. This excitable podcast host is on his way to have a lie down. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.